I'm Becky King from Career Education. I'm joined with my colleague,
Dana Keep. Hello, nice to see you all.
Thanks for joining us today. We are so excited. We have been thinking about this webinar for a long time because we spend a lot of our conversations with alums discussing confidence and discussing strengths and discussing superpowers. So we said, you know what, it's been a long winter. How about spring forward, embracing your strengths, superpowers, and confidence? And so we're very much looking forward to sharing today's conversation with you. And I'm hoping if you're comfortable as you're joining now, if you wouldn't mind, it would be wonderful to share what comes to mind in the chat. What comes to mind when you think about superpowers? What pops into your head when you were thinking about today's webinar? If you feel like you can share some of those in the chat, we'd welcome that. Why strengths, superpowers, and confidence? Because we feel that they're intertwined. We feel that when you're in touch with your strengths, and we are defining superpowers as your top strengths, and it impacts your confidence. It makes you feel good. You're engaged with work you enjoy. We know from numerous studies that career happiness depends upon us doing what we're best at and what we enjoy. And we hope that you'll leave today with some concrete takeaways. We're going to share some resources, some websites, different assessment tools. We're also going to ask you to think about exercises and steps that you can take now that spring is finally here to move forward. So we also will have time for questions at the end. We won't take the full hour for our presentation, so that'll leave time. And we know too that in terms of finding your strengths, we stumble over our weaknesses and our flaws. And so we talked a lot about superpowers and kryptonite, and trying to think about Superman avoiding the kryptonite while getting in touch with, his superpowers. But I think it is important to be aware of your flaws and weaknesses so that you can really mitigate those aspects that really defeat our self-confidence. So we'll get started.
Okay, thanks for that introduction, Becky. And I am going to take a brief detour here because we really do want to spend this time focusing on strengths because, as Becky was describing, our career happiness and usually our general happiness depends on being able to use your strengths, more than a little bit. So we want to focus our webinar on strengths, and we hope that you'll want to try to focus more of your life's work and activities on strengths. But my detour on weaknesses is the following. Most people understand that strengths and weaknesses are often flip sides of the same coin. They're not two separate buckets where you have this one over here that's all good and this one over here that's all bad. That's just not really how it works when you think about personality. So it's important to note that strengths and weaknesses are sometimes connected. So sometimes a strength that you have taken to an extreme can be a weakness. For example, say that you are a terrific organizational planner, and that's a real strength of yours. And when an event is coming up, you're just fantastic at planning it, thinking about the timeline, what's going to happen. But perhaps if you take that to an extreme when the event's actually happening and something goes differently than you had planned, maybe you're not the best person to actually do that. Maybe you need to rely on some colleagues who are better, and one of their strengths is adaptability. So that's an example of how the organizational planning strength can actually be a weakness if something happens with the plan. The other thing that's important to know and why it's good to have some recognition of your weaknesses is that you can actually use your strengths to help you with your weaknesses. And we spend a lot of time helping people figure out what strengths they're going to really use in their job search, in an interview, in their career design, and we'd love to help you with that. One example that comes to mind there is let's say that you are a person who isn't always great at starting and taking initiative and getting going with the project, but maybe you're really high on empathy. Maybe empathy is a strength for you. So in that case, you might use your empathy to help you get going. You might say, I know my other teammates in this project are working and I don't want to let them down. So I'm going to get going on my side of the project. And that's an example of how you would use a strength to help compensate for something that's a little bit less strong for you. So that's my detour on weaknesses, and we're going to mostly focus on strengths. We're going to talk about how to identify your strengths. We have a few tools. We're going to talk about how to articulate your strengths, because it's not really good just to have them. You have to be able to talk about them. Then we're going to talk about some confidence issues that can derail strengths for some people. And then finally, we're going to end up on a high note and talk about superpowers and different ways you can use them. So how to identify your strengths? Becky's going to start us off.
Okay. There are a number of assessments, and some assessments cost money. The ones we're sharing with you today are by and large free. And these are just a few. There are many tools out there to help you identify your strengths, what you're best at. But the ones that we like and we rely on fairly frequently and we've had good feedback on consistently are SkillScan, and Dana's going to share these links for all of you. SkillScan, which we use in our one-on-one appointments. You can also go to the site of SkillScan. They have a lot of materials there. There's recently Lindsay Pollock, who's a writer. We were attending her webinar. She wrote a book called Recalculating, and she shared that there's a free strengths questionnaire with Capfinity there. So that's from her. Clifton Strengths is a fee-based, it's not excessive, but there's $25, I think, for your top 10 strengths, something like that. We use Strengths Quest a lot in our team meetings to think about different strengths those of us in career education possess. And it's really quite interesting to see the relevancy. It's relative. That's what I mean to say, relative to. So many of us might share, as Dana just mentioned, empathy, and yet we might approach a problem in different ways. Or several people might have strategic thinking in their top 5 strengths, but they'll approach, if they're on a team together, the task at hand a little bit differently, or cede, control of a meeting differently, and things like that. So you will see that even if you share strengths with someone, you can approach them differently. But Clifton is a good one. There's a free version that gives you your top 5 strengths, and that's what the high 5 test is about. And the VIA character strengths assessment is about a 10-minute free assessment. Again, if you want to pay, you can get a more in-depth assessment from them. And why is it important to get in touch with your strengths? Because, as I've said earlier, knowing what you do well and feeling comfortable in that space, and then seeking work that you find meaningful as well and engaging, that's what leads to career happiness. And it's overall as well, your health is impacted, your confidence is impacted when you're playing to your strengths. So that's why we're starting with strengths. What are some other ways, Dana, that you can sort of anticipate or get in touch with or get clarity on your strengths?
Sure. Becky and I love those online assessments, but not everybody does. So we have some different ways that you can get in touch with them. The second idea that I'd like to throw out there, we call peak experiences. You may have heard of this, but our suggestion is that you think back over your life and think about experiences where you were a key actor and where the experience was really rewarding to you. It doesn't have to be the highest accomplishment of your career. It doesn't have to be winning an award. It doesn't have to be getting a promotion. It could be a volunteer gig that you had, or something that you started in your neighborhood, but something that was very rewarding to you and something where you had an active role. What you might ask yourself some questions if you can come up with 3 to 5 of these experiences, you might ask yourself some questions. You might say, what is a common thread amongst these experiences? What stands out when I look back on this? Where was I during these experiences? Who was around me? What was I actually doing? What did the environment look like? And you might discover a variety of things. You might say, wow, all of my peak experiences involve me using numbers. Or you might say, wow, all of my peak experiences involve nothing to do with quantitative things. Or you might say, I seem to be thriving in fast-paced environments. Or the experiences I remember are ones where I had time to prepare. Those felt really rewarding to me. Or the experiences I remember are times when I'm translating for someone, helping someone understand something, teaching. That's a common thread throughout my peak experiences. So these notes that you take do not even have to be complete sentences. If that stops you, just try to identify 3 to 5 peak experiences and look back on them. And that is a second way that you can try to identify or uncover more of your strengths.
What do people say about you? What do your friends say about you? What do your colleagues say about you? This is also a helpful tool, because when we're too much on our own and our own thoughts, it's very easy just to focus on what we wish we did better or we're not that good at. I find, anyway, it's very easy to do that. So asking your friends and people who know you for feedback can be illuminating. Asking for a 360 review, and you can do this, and it's sort of a sharing proposition where you ask for a 360 review, which is basically all around, like everything about me, giving, and there's some set questions you can ask about this. Many of you are probably familiar with the concept of the 360 review, but basically, even asking one word. It's a simple exercise. One word that comes to mind when you think of me is, and I'm really pleased. Thank you for sharing. Many of you shared, fortitude, resilience, optimism. These are your superpowers. These are those top strengths that people would identify thinking about you as. You always make me feel good. You exude warmth, or you're always a clear and critical thinker. And when I really need critical feedback, I come to you. And it's not usually the same person for everything, right? The person that we go to when we need most comfort is not necessarily the person that we need to shake us up and say, give me a kick, So anyway, getting that feedback. One word I find can be very helpful: buoyancy, ballast. Maybe you're just funny, you make me laugh. These are important things, because this is how people perceive us, after all. So rather than just your self-perception. So I think it's helpful, as you're thinking about this, if you haven't already done this, to make a point of asking friends and colleagues. And of course, if it's a colleague situation, you can say, let's do it as a group. We'll give each other feedback. But you can even think about, what would, my epitaph be if you were, speaking about my legacy, what would it be? What title would you give to my biography, or my, if I were to write an autobiography, what do you think it would be? So.
Great. That's a fun one. The third idea that we have for you is what we call quick journals. I think some people love journaling, some people don't, but I want to suggest that these would be a very quick kind of journaling exercise. So by that, I mean 5 minutes at the end of the day for 2 to 3 weeks. And we have 3 different examples that might help different people in different ways. The first one's called an infinite list. So every day at the end of the day, you spend 5 minutes and you think about anything you did that felt like a positive contribution. It could be, I checked in on my elderly neighbor during the pandemic every day, or I planted a garden, or I helped someone who was going through a tough time, or I helped someone organize their thoughts around a topic that was really challenging for them, whatever it might be. And do that 5 minutes a day for 2 or 3 weeks. Looking back on it, you might find there's a theme. You might find there's a common thread, just as I said with peak experiences. But you might find that you notice that something you do regularly that you just hadn't really taken the time to notice as much as you do when you do this little quick journaling. The next 2 examples of a quick journal come from the book Designing Your Life, which Becky and I recommend frequently. If you've been on any of our webinars or had any appointments with us, you've probably heard about it. It's written by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. And so the second example of a quick journal that could be helpful is energy mapping. Energy mapping would be, again, at the end of the day, you say, where was your energy the highest during the day and where was it the lowest? Oh my gosh, my energy was so low today because I had to figure out my taxes, or my energy was so high today because The classroom that I'm teaching was really energized about the topic we were talking about. So high and low energy points, 5 minutes at the end of the day, 2 to 3 weeks, look back and see where those high and low energy moments are. And the third one is another really helpful one with 3 questions. What did I initiate? Whom did I help? And what did I learn? And if at the end of the day, you answer those 3 questions, the answer could be something or nothing, and you look back, you might say, wow, I really don't have the opportunity to initiate anything in my workday, or I think I haven't been learning at work. That's maybe something that's missing for me. Or I do find that I'm helping a certain group of people a lot. That's probably a strength of mine. So the infinite list, the energy mapping, and the 3 questions are all these quick journaling ideas that force you to put something on paper so that you have something to look back on. Because otherwise, when we look back on our 2 or 3 weeks, we may not accurately remember where we spent our time and energy.
Because, you know, it's a human nature. They've done many studies on this too, that it's human nature to dwell on the negative. And so if you don't write it down, you are apt to just focus on what didn't go well, and the taxes were draining. And after all, I'm just not that good at figuring out, you know, strategically where to put my money or whatever. And you beat yourself up instead of thinking about, hey, you know what I noticed? These were the high points. And journaling will really help you do that. Another concept I'm sure many of you have heard of is flow. And this term was coined by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, don't ask me to spell that, a Hungarian. And he, in fact, in Budapest, there's a flow cafe. And he loosely defines the concept as it reduces stress. It's the opposite of stress, really, because it's mutually exclusive. Flow and stress cannot exist at the same time. Your ego falls away. It's one thing leads to another, and time just flies by. And he likens it to jazz. And I don't know if any of you are jazz fans, but it has that sort of idea of just one thought jumping to the next, and you're just so absorbed and so energized and yet at peace at the same time. It can be very helpful to well, for one, it changes your brain chemistry. So it actually helps physically, and it helps your well-being. But it really does come back to confidence and creativity and expressing yourself in the workplace. This is essential. So if you haven't tried a flow exercise, we recommend that.
Okay, so those are 4 ideas for trying to uncover more strengths. We're going to pause here and share a slide, and we'll give you time to read it because it does have a lot of words on it. This is a list of strengths that comes from a Forbes magazine article a couple of years ago, and it's grouped strengths or superpowers into separate groups. And we're going to give you a moment to look at this one. And then we have one more slide because we want to give you a little bit of an injection of ideas so you can start thinking about your own superpowers, and then strengths and superpowers. And then we might ask you to throw something into the chat if you feel comfortable sharing something that you really identify with, something that resonates with you. So I'm going to pause here for a minute and just let you read this, and then I will move to the next screen in a minute or so, and then we will go back and talk a little bit about how to articulate your strengths. So.
And I'm going to add while you're reviewing this and we'll be sending the Forbes link article out when we send the recording out to all of you from today. But this list was also part of the article was about job function. And is your job function aligned with these strengths and superpowers? Because if you're unhappy in your work, it tends to be that your function is not aligned with your strengths. And so what was of interest to me in this Forbes article is hopefully we can redefine how our jobs are categorized, because if they were more formed around your strengths and skills, rather than your job function, we think people would probably find more happiness. So
So true. Okay. On this slide, actually, okay, Becky and I tried to think about things that our friends or our family showed us, or strengths that we could identify in each other, since we are partners in crime at Career Education. And these were some more quirky, funny things that came out, but we wanted to show you some examples that weren't quite as organized and grouped as in a Forbes article. So maybe things like this make you think of someone in your family, make you think of ways that people often describe you, and maybe this helps you also brainstorm about your own strengths and superpowers. All right.
That's the way that Dana and I think work best. Is I love brainstorming, and Dana is particularly gifted at organizing and putting things into an outline. And I'm not particularly good at organizing closets. Dana happens to love organizing closets. So I think it's wonderful that even though she and I share a lot of what I would say are superpowers, it turns out we're very, in actuality, doing things a little bit differently. And that's wonderful. And that's what you hope for, right? Is you don't want to all be identical. In a work team, the strongest teams balance one another, right? So
absolutely. All right, returning then to how to articulate your strengths.
I think I just read, leave a little more silent space for us to review, but
oh, sorry. I can put them up at the end when we're answering questions. I'll be happy to put those slides back up.
But all right, so how to articulate your strengths. So as we mentioned earlier, knowing them is important, but just knowing them isn't enough, because you're going to be asked to talk about yourself and to share what you're best at. And in any interview, and I know many of you have been or will be soon going through interviews. And even if it isn't an interview, it could be in a social environment or a get together. Who are you? Hi, what do you do? And so to be able to articulate what you're best at. So how do you take these strengths, these superpowers, and put them into a narrative, a story? I mean, certainly there are different ways to do this. We often talk in interviewing about the PAR-STAR example, which is, here's the situation, this was the task, the action I took, and the result I got. So if that works for you, fine, use that. But I think in weaving together a story, and by the way, I should have said this at the outset, any one of these concepts, strengths, superpowers, confidence, that we're covering today could have been its own webinar. I meant to say this. And in fact, there are multiple webinars on each of these micro topics. And we're trying to fold them all in today in this Spring Forward webinar. So we're kind of coasting along at quite a clip. So putting these into a story, you want to think about all the things you journaled and wrote down and kept track of. And now you're going to weave together not just what these strengths are, but why are these your strengths? Why are these your superpowers? Because they come to you so naturally, because you don't have to put out a lot of effort. So if everything else was taken away, you would still be exuding empathy, or you would still be strategically thinking, or you would still be cleaning someone's closet. It just is something you do no matter what. And so I think telling that story, and I know one of you, in fact, noted in the chat that in the wake of the tragic shootings, people have been discussing, legacy. So thinking about that, really, what is what I most want to be known for, what I most want to leave behind, and how do I articulate that to somebody? How do I put that into words? And how, so how and why are important to know when it comes to this. And also, as I said earlier, how will this play with the team you are interviewing with or joining? You have to think about it that way too, right? You don't need to be identical to your boss. You need to complement and support what your supervisor will need and what your teammates will need. So.
One thing that Becky and I always say when we're helping people with preparing for interviews is to practice out loud, because practicing in your head just doesn't do the trick. And so when you're thinking about talking about your strengths and superpowers, even if you don't have an interview coming up, this is something you may want to practice, because this is not something we all get a lot of practice on. We don't just, maybe we've we're trying always to be humble, or we've been taught to be self-deprecating or things like that. And so practicing out loud, walking that line between confidence and humility is really important. As I said, sometimes people can take self-deprecating humor too far, and it takes away what the ideas they're trying to convey about what they could contribute. On the other hand, others are not good at talking in a way that shares credit with people, and they may come off as sounding rather arrogant or overly confident. So you want to be confident in what you contribute, and you also want to be able to recognize what strengths other people have and show that you're willing to learn. That's really what that walking the line is. And I think it takes practice to do it. And another thing that we sometimes notice is that people use language that takes away from the story you're trying to tell about your strengths. Someone might say in an interview, well, I was working at this company and I kind of took the initiative to start this project. I'm not really sure how it happened, but it seemed like maybe my idea was, and if you're saying things like kind of and sort of, and I'm not sure, and maybe, those are the kinds of little language habits or tics that don't really help you tell your story. So practicing, recording yourself, listening to make sure you're not using that kind of language can really help you. And also recording yourself can give you more comfort in describing your strengths. And we're certainly not going to walk around, at every neighborhood gathering or cocktail party or work meeting, blasting on about our strengths. But when the time comes and you're interviewing or someone's asking what you're interested in and you'd really like to be able to share, it's important to have practiced them out loud.
And just following up on that thought, you've probably read this, but many women put in I just in an email, and it's automatically discounts what you're about to say. So all these filler words and discounting words, we have to be very mindful of. They come automatically. So confidence, as I said, we could write, there are many books written on this. We could have spent the entire time talking about confidence, and we're only going to spend in the end, probably 5 minutes here discussing it, but it's intricately interwoven with your strengths. Where we feel strong, we also have this nagging negative self-talk going on. And so it's very easy to have a failure and then doubt ourselves, or things didn't go as we planned. Oh, see, I'm not cut out for this. And you have to be mindful, because if you're not careful, that can go into what we're going to discuss in a minute, which is imposter syndrome. But confidence in general, we want to think about as, we know it's a thing. We know it's important. We know that we admire people who enter a room and exude confidence. How do we do that without fake it till you make it feelings? How can we do that? And there are a number of tips here, and I'm not going to do justice to all of this, but some of this is simply physicality. And again, to the practicing in front of a mirror, it's posture, it's, power posture, it's literally standing as if you were Wonder Woman or Superman, and, hands on hips, shoulders back, deep breath, and already chemically your brain will feel more confident. But some of this is beyond that, and some of this requires more active counteraction to this. And it really, I think the danger is when we ruminate a lot, and ruminating, obsessing on things, and getting that negative thought spiral going. That's when you want to say, whoa, stop. And you get stuck. You start overthinking. Women have more neural capacity than men, so we tend to just sort of get stuck more easily and worry more. So getting stuck is one sort of bugaboo with confidence. Overthinking, overanalyzing, thinking you have to know what you're going to do 5 years from now, instead of realizing it's more important to focus on the next 5 days or five weeks. And I think if there's one thing I think about a lot in the past year, it's that we can't possibly know the next year or 2 years from now. So let's focus on the here and now and what we can accomplish. And again, play back to those strengths. And also taking baby steps is important here too, to get you unstuck. any step in that direction towards more positive will be helpful, rather than feeling like you have to jump across the Grand Canyon and, have it all figured out. So.
Great. The second issue, as Becky alluded to, that really could be affecting a lot of people's confidence right now is what we've been through this last year. We've never been through a pandemic like this. And for many people, it's been exceedingly difficult, tragic, but for most everyone, there's been plenty of downside. And a hit to the self-confidence is a common one that we're hearing. An example might be if someone came in and talked to one of us and said, wow, this year did not go as I planned. I was sure I was going to get a promotion. That didn't happen. And, now I'm at a loss. I don't even know if I can still do my plan. I don't know if I can still achieve what I wanted to. So what would we recommend to deal with that kind of not self-confident thinking? Well, the first one is to think about the big picture and realize that this pandemic has affected everyone and that you are not alone. Very often when we are thinking those things, we're feeling very self-focused, and that's usually not the case. We're usually not the only one feeling that way, we can assure you, because we talk to maybe hundreds of people feeling that way. And the second thing to do is to show some compassion to yourself the way you would show it to a friend. This is something I learned very recently, but we have such a tendency to be hard on ourselves, like, gosh darn it, Dana, you just got to get up and get out there. What's wrong with you? That's not actually the way to help yourself in the most beneficial way. I was shocked to find that actually being nice to yourself is better. And so think about what you would say if a friend came to you and said, wow, I really thought I was going to get that promotion. I didn't. I'm at a loss. I don't really think I can do it anymore. You'd probably say, oh, well, I can understand how disappointed you are, but boy, I know you to have accomplished X, Y, and Z. And I'm sure that, a delay in your promotion, or perhaps maybe you even want to look for something new. I'm sure that either one of those routes will still get you to where you want to go, because you're a person with these talents and you are valued by your company and you recently were recognized for such and such. And if you start talking to yourself in the same way you would talk to a friend that you believe in and care about, you will find that it can do wonders for your self-confidence.
Dun, dun, dun. Imposter syndrome. Here it is. So imposter syndrome, you've probably all heard about it. And I wish that I had the snap your fingers, here's the quick fix. That doesn't exist. But to be aware of what it is and to be aware of when you're falling prey to it is important. I would define it loosely. Again, this is not Webster's dictionary definition of it, but I would say imposter syndrome is a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evidence of success, chronic self-doubt, sense of intellectual fraudulence that overrides your feelings of success or any external proof of competence. And I would say that imposter syndrome differs from just feeling a little bit of low self-confidence, because low self-confidence usually can be temporary. If you have imposter syndrome and you feel like you're really suffering under the weight of that, it tends to be pervasive and ongoing, and often takes a lot more effort to counteract it. I do have some tips to share to mitigate it. I wish somebody out there had a solution for it, but there are therapists who talk about working with clients in an ongoing way for this. So just know that. I also think that if you say, oh yeah, that's me, I have imposter syndrome, I must be the only one who really has that, you should know that you are in good company. Through studies and surveys, anywhere from 50 to 70% of the population identifies suffering from imposter syndrome. So it's that sense that I'm faking it and they're going to find out, instead of feeling like, you know what, I am good at this. I'm not good at everything, but I'm good at this, and being able to shake that feeling. So to counterbalance this, I would say, and again, I'm sorry, this needs to be so quick, but we just want to leave time for questions today too. Some of the things you can do are to acknowledge that there are societal factors, acknowledge that there are external influences that are contributing to this. Just being aware of it is important. And then being kind to yourself. We've said this a few times today. We'll say it again. Be kind to yourself. Treat yourself as you would treat other people, and be more tolerant. Celebrating the small wins, even if it's, you think, well, I'm finally going to ask for that promotion that I've been dreading and thinking about and perseverating about, and I'm finally going to do it. That's a small win. Celebrate that. Don't just dismiss that as a little thing. That's a big thing. That's important. Another thing you can do to sort of celebrate and embrace and be kinder to yourself is to keep track of that external, those compliments that you do get, the notes people will write you saying thank you, your thoughtfulness was much appreciated, and you specific feedback and positive things like that. Keep a file. I remember years ago, somebody said to me, when you get an email thanking you and somebody goes into detail saying, thanks to you, I was able to, save it. Put it in your happy folder. And when you're having a bad day and the rain won't stop outside and you're feeling gloomy and doomy, open up your file, look at those notes, and remember, you made a difference. You are important. You can do this. That's important. So you can have a brag book. You can have whatever you need to do. It's important to have a physical thing you can open up and remind yourself. Or I have a bulletin board off to my side here, which is just filled with photos of loved ones, quotes that I love, happy memories. So anytime you feel anxious or lacking in confidence, there's your boost. You need that. And this may seem superficial, but sometimes if you're about to give a presentation, you need to have, again, the posture or the dress or the jewelry or the accessory that makes you feel. I was joking with Dana that I think I'm going to constantly have to wear, scarves, because I'm completely self-conscious about what's happened to my neck as I'm in middle age now. So, whatever it is that you feel you need to put that best foot forward, put it on, do it, because it does help internally as well. And finally, don't let perfection be the enemy of good, and choose progress over perfection. Compare apples to apples. Don't compare apples to oranges, and ask for help. Get input. Do this as a group. Find friends who will help you. Don't be alone and isolated in this feeling.
Okay, and the final thing that I would like to share about confidence smashing effects out there has to do with the 3 Ps. And I love alliteration. So I love this one because it's easy for me to remember. And I think it's really important to, if you can recognize any of these 3 Ps, you want to recognize them, exaggerate them, and then really kind of use logic to talk yourself out of them. So the 3 Ps are pervasive, permanent, and personal. So let's take an example. Let's say, wow, I prepared for that interview. I did my research. I talked to people. I thought the interview went really well. I got down to 2 people and I wasn't chosen. So you're feeling really rotten and your confidence has taken a hit. So you might start thinking about the word pervasive, and you're thinking, I didn't get that. I'm not going to be able to do anything now. I won't even be able to get on that nonprofit board that I wanted. I won't be able to achieve my exercise goals. I didn't get that interview. Life is just going to go south here. So of course, if you exaggerate it like that, that's really silly. Just because you didn't get one job offer, you're in fantastic company. Most of the world, probably all of the world has had that experience, so that it's really not going to be pervasive in your life. So when you really exaggerate it, sometimes that helps you see it. You might say, you might start thinking about the word permanent. Well, I didn't get that job, so I'm probably not going to get any job. I might as well just stop trying. I might as well be content where I am. I'm never going to be able to move forward, return to work, make a transition, whatever it might be. I'm just going to be stuck here forever because this is a permanent affliction that I have. And of course, when you exaggerate that, you say, that is really not true. Look around at everyone people have all had stumbles, obstacles, learning opportunities, moments that things didn't go the way they wanted to them, and they are certainly not permanent. And the final one is personal. wow, there must be something terrible about me. I wasn't offered the job. I obviously have some great failures here. I obviously have some huge gaps in what I can do. And again, if you exaggerate it so much, you realize that's ridiculous. They could have had to choose the other person because the other person was recommended by the CEO, or they chose the other person because they flat out had more experience than you did. And that, you know, it was a great experience to interview for that role, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get that job offer. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're the only one who's never gotten a job offer. So pervasive, permanent, and personal. If you find yourself thinking about those, you know, thinking down a path that relates to any of those 3 Ps, you want to recognize it and then exaggerate it in such a way that it becomes so silly and ridiculous that you realize, of course, that isn't a helpful way of thinking. I can't keep going down that path. And then hopefully your confidence will return.
Something that we haven't touched on, but is a major part of this whole confidence to superpowers leap, if you will, is mindset. And I'm sure if you haven't already heard about it, I highly recommend the work of Carol Dweck on mindset. And she has for years been studying fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And it's not that we're 100% of the time in growth or 100% of the time in fixed, but the idea would be push yourself towards a growth mindset and try to avoid the fixed mindset, because the fixed mindset is zero sum. I'm either good at it or I'm not good at it, or I failed because, rather than the growth mindset, which says I'm not good at it yet, and I haven't succeeded at this yet, or I'm getting better at this. I do need to work on my math skills, but I'm not horrible in math forever, pervasive and permanently and personally just bad at math. It's something I can address and work on. And so I meant to mention that earlier. The growth mindset is a huge piece of the confidence scenario. I also wanted to address a quick comment here that somebody made about moving from the folder, the manila folder of happy cards and comments, to digital. And I actually do have an email folder, digital folder, for those compliments and thank you notes and happy emails. I call it my happy email folder. So you can move to the digital for that. So now we are at the point of our program, folks, where we are entering the superpowers. And as we've discussed, and I think all of you pretty much innately knew at the get-go, because we asked you to share in the chat what superpowers, what you were thinking about entering today's webinar. And I would agree and concur. Most of you wrote superpowers are the things that really come most naturally to you, and the 2 or 3 of your top strengths that you really don't have to work at. We talked earlier about, you know, skills and strengths, and you can, somebody asked, can these change? Can you adjust them? Of course. I don't think anyone was born as a concert pianist. It happens to be, you know, Yo-Yo Ma wasn't born as the world's premier cellist, but he probably had some gifts given that he was born into a musical family, but he worked at it. You know, you will work at these things to get better at them. And those are skills you can develop. But a superpower is just something that you just sort of, it's a characteristic, and you can think, I think a lot, and Dana and I talk a lot about each of us has 2 boys, and you think, well, you'd expect them to be more alike, right? We raise them much the same way, but yet they are born with different strengths, different superpowers. One is, since I can remember, wonderful spatial relationships and just has a visual acuity that I've never had. The other one is just sort of innately harmonious and understands the world around him and the people around him. I didn't teach him that. So, you know, I think those are the things we're talking about when we talk about superpowers. And I think, well, enough on that. I think we could go on and on about what is a superpower? Why is it important to get? But I think you wanted to, I think you wanted to share something, Dana, at this point.
Yeah,
but,
I'm going to share this.
Anyway, one of the things that you can do in terms of this sort of, we want you to go out and try to take some steps today too. We hope that one of the things we're going to close with are having you share some steps you're planning on taking. But one of the things with superpowers is to share them and to articulate them. I think we did touch on that. And it isn't enough just to know that empathy is your superpower or that organization is your superpower. You have to go out and help the world with that superpower. So connecting with like-minded souls who are curious about the same things as you are, thinking expansively about where you might use your superpowers. I think it's important to, work with a friend or a small group. I have found actually this is something I would recommend if your classmates from Wellesley, or if your union meeting is coming up, or you have a just informal get together. This can be something you do with one another. Do a 360 with one another. What do you remember best about me during our time at Wellesley, or what comes to mind when you think of me over the years, or and I know just from anecdotally, a friend of mine who had been out of the workforce for many years was re-entering the workforce, had a lot of thoughts and fears about re-entry after 15 years away or whatever it had been. Well, she got together with a group of Wellesley friends of hers out in the Bay Area, and they did a 360 with one another. And she sent me an email one day and said, you've known me since we were born. what do you think of when you think about me? And it was a wonderful exercise. And I think, she learned a lot. And it really helped her get back in, and she did a relaunch, and now she has a job. So I think those are some actionable steps.
I also think that that what we're trying to do here is help you see that if you're using your superpowers, there's a spillover effect. And so if you're using them in one way, that can help with confidence in another realm. If you're able to use your strengths and superpowers, perhaps to help your neighborhood, that might give you even more confidence when you're going for a job interview. So Becky had mentioned briefly thinking expansively about where to use them. Maybe you're in a job where it isn't a great fit right now, and it's going to take you a while to find one, but maybe you can find a different outlet for using that superpower, because even doing that on a less than 40-hour-a-week basis will help you. So the last three things that we wanted to throw out there, we are a little bit reiterating, but taking action almost every day is really important. If you want to think about the quote, you don't need to act to be confident. You don't need to be confident to act. You need to act to be confident. I said it backwards at first, sorry. That's a really helpful quote, because just a small action does help your confidence. And most people think they need to wait for that confidence to start before they can start. So,
and one of the things we were talking about earlier is that one word feedback. And I mentioned ballast and buoyancy, and I love alliteration as much as Dana does. But honestly, I was thinking when I put those words out there of my parents, who I know them quite well, and they've been together for 56 years. And I clearly think of one of them as the buoyant one, and one of them as the ballast. And without the other, there wouldn't be enough, the buoyancy wouldn't be enough, right? The ballast keeps the ship moving forward. And I think that sometimes if you can get too caught up in that perseverating reflection of yourself and getting down on yourself, it's helpful to look at someone else and say, I really admire that about this person. Whether you have that strength or not, it's helpful to see that you admire that, and that, share that to them, first of all. And I think it's really important to externalize that to somebody else. We don't do enough of that. And I think you never get tired of it, right? If somebody pays a compliment to you or says, authentically, this is what I think you have meant to me, it's never overkill, never too much. I know one of you shared earlier in the chat, I used to feel like I had superpowers. I'm not sure I do anymore. It's very easy to fall into that doubtful, I'm not sure I have them anymore feeling, but I have never met a person who didn't have at least one superpower that you really kind of come back to as a touchstone over and over again, that's there for you, that it may be that you haven't, it's gotten cloudy, it's gotten murky, and you haven't seen it. Let's turn the windshield wiper fluid on and clear that away. And I think there are some ways to do that. I hope we've shared those with you today. So,
and I also think it's very it's a relief to realize there is no universal superpower. So take that pressure off of yourself, focus on the ones that you have, celebrate what other people have. And then if there are ways that you can help people around you by using your superpowers, maybe you help give them ideas because you're a great idea person. Maybe you bring humor to a situation where they could really use a laugh. Maybe you give them confidence because you're great at that. That's those helping others around you. And we see this all the time in the Wellesley community. I just look at the chat in today's webinar, any webinar, and you're always helping each other, encouraging each other, sharing information. And that is a wonderful, wonderful value of being in a community like this. And even Becky and I, as she mentioned earlier, we try to help each other with our superpowers. We hope that if we put them together, we create a better webinar than we would each create alone. So it's really important to help those around you by using what comes naturally to you. So maybe now, while we read some questions in the chat, if you feel like it, you might put in a superpower that you have and what you might do with it. What's one small action you could take going forward, springing forward, as it were, and then we can take a look at the questions that have come up.
I'm loving all the comments you're all putting into the chat. It just reminds me again, when we say don't do this alone. On my own, I would only have come up with half of what we've covered today. Dana and I together feel like we have good synergy, but with all of you joining us, even so much more, right? So I think, wow, what a group can accomplish. And I really appreciate all of you sharing this.
Here's a great question about Malcolm Gladwell's book and the 10,000 hours to become an expert in something. And so certainly there's overlap with all of these things, right? I think, people have a talent for music, but if they don't practice, it's never gonna really manifest itself. And same thing with writing or other artistic things or anything where practice makes perfect. So there's overlap, but there's also some differences. I would say that what we've been mostly talking about today, the strengths and superpowers, are things that come naturally to you, ways you are in the world, tendencies you have, preferences you have for how to approach something or how to relate to other people. And certainly there are, you might have an innate writing strength, but you would have to practice it to get better. So there's overlap, but there's difference a little bit. Some things you might say, wow, technology is a real weakness of mine, but I need it for this job. And if you took a course in Excel and you practiced using Salesforce or Slack or whatever platform your future company uses, you could get better at it. That I would call more of a, functional training to compensate for something that you considered a weakness versus what we're talking about today, which are more natural strengths.
But somebody had earlier asked about marketable skills. And for sure, I would say thinking about marketable skills, a lot of that goes back to how do you articulate the skills and strengths and superpowers that you have. And the key here is the marketable skill to the job, marketable to the market, right? So, you could be an expert farmer, but if you're not at the farmer's market, it hardly matters, right? You need to, grow the crop and then you're marketing the crop. So we're all about helping you see your marketable skills in resumes, cover letters, and interviews. I think knowing when you read a job description and it says, we're looking for someone who's a strategic thinker, who has a vision, who can be a leader of our team, and wow, leadership and vision, those are my top two strengths. That's when you go, oh yeah, now those are definitely marketable skills. And you're going to get into, examples of where you time and again, led a team and done that. Now, that said, you may also say, well, what about a time when I know I have the leadership skills, but the job is saying lead a team of 20 and I've never led a team of 20. What do I do with that? That's when you would say, even though I haven't led a team of 20, I know that I'm a born leader because these are some examples of where I've been leading with a smaller group or solo practice or whatever I've done, and you can give examples, then that's okay. You haven't had a team of 20 yet, but I'm expressing to you that I'm confident that I could do this. You really need to help them imagine you in the role with examples like that.
Great question about advice on hiring people whose strengths are different from your own. I mean, I think you can directly ask people about strengths. You can ask them to share stories about their strengths in an interview. Sometimes you can ask them about that concept of flip sides of the same coin and see what they come up with. Sometimes people can go down a bad path on that in an interview, but sometimes if you ask for areas where they'd like to improve, and then areas where they think they're very strong, that's just a little bit of a different way of approaching it versus, I think, that canned question, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, is a little bit old. I try to ask that question in much different ways now when I'm interviewing people.
Somebody asked about, is value proposition or brand the same thing? It's interesting. I would say your value proposition is, what is your value to the employer? What is your value to the team and the job at hand? Your brand very much more is, I would say your brand could be your superpower, right? Thinking just again of Gloria Steinem as a well-known person, what her brand would be is certainly she's a writer, but really what is she writing about? The women's liberation, women's experiences, so thinking about it in a broad sense, she is a conduit for so many women, right? And she has shared so many women's stories. She's a storyteller. She's, so those are things I would think about. And yes, it could be your brand for sure.
Someone asked about conveying, this was an older question, so I think it's conveying confidence via Zoom. And certainly there have been endless webinars on your Zoom presence and virtual presence and things like that. I mean, I don't think it's entirely separate. If you are feeling confident and able to deliver information in a confident manner without Zoom, you probably can with Zoom. Although most people agree, most of the experts that I've listened to would say that in a virtual platform, you have to maybe give yourself a little more oomph than you would in a face-to-face setting. Just try to project a little bit more. Becky's an actress, so she's probably better at answering that part than I am, but project a little bit more, focus on your enthusiasm a little bit more, because you do have to get from one computer through to another. And if you're in person with someone, that might be a little bit more easy to convey.
All right.
Other questions? Other ideas for actions you're going to take?
Or any other questions that have come up that we haven't seen or haven't addressed? Or it's tough to speak, keep track of the chat, make sure that we're getting to everybody.
Actually, Becky, there was one on the neural connections for women versus men.
Yes, and I have that here in my stack of articles, and I'm going to need to find that and reference it when we send the email out in a few days. But okay, I was excited to see that too. Yes, 30% more neural activity. Wow.
I hope that you all know that you are more than welcome to make appointments with either of us to talk about your own situation, your own questions, your own obstacles, your own strengths. We'd love to talk to any of you about that. Making an appointment through Handshake is the best way to go about it. We will send out the link to the recording in about a week, along with the Forbes article and the list of the assessments, if you would like. And one action that came up for me, great. Excellent. That sounds good.
And somebody asked about when you get a rejection letter. Did we address that one yet? No, I don't think we did. When you get a rejection letter. What should you do? Well, the first thought when you get a rejection letter is, oh, I guess I thought that was a good job fit for me, but I guess it wasn't, and at least that's my reaction. And to counteract that immediately with, there may have been 100 applicants, all of whom were qualified. And it could be that, somebody's friend of a friend happened to be chosen ahead of me. It wasn't because I wasn't right for this job. What you can do logistically is you can always follow up and inquire. They may or may not answer you. Sometimes I've found that for liability reasons or fear of lawsuit, they won't respond to, queries about why, might I, or do you have constructive feedback that would help me? I felt like this was a good fit for me. What might I do differently? Sometimes they will give you very helpful feedback. We've certainly talked to graduates who say, it was a little bit of a slap in the face, but it was really helpful to me that I got the feedback that I did not sell myself well enough, or I did not, something I said wrong or did wrong, and I wasn't aware of it. And so that's where that 360 can really be helpful. I wasn't aware that I was coming across that way. But generally, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start all over again. I mean, with a rejection, it's just one rejection. I mean, I remember, people making jokes about, I've wallpapered my room with rejection letters, or, you cannot let that take away from your intrinsic worth, your feeling of self-worth. It can't. And
And I would also add that I think when you reach out, you want to be as gracious and positive as possible, as Becky was saying, asking for feedback, because you never know. You might have been the second choice and the first choice might not work out. So saying that you're disappointed is fair. Saying that your interest remains strong in this kind of work or this particular type of company or organization is really helpful. And they may end up having to turn to you. I've heard that more times than you would think. So being gracious, being positive, asking for feedback. And, if that's all it is, then you dust yourself off and sort of focus on the next thing that you're going to try, as Becky said. But it's a good thing to, generally speaking, to try to reach out.
I'm mindful of the time, but I also know that Dana and I are able to stay on with any of you who still had some questions that haven't been yet addressed. And we will certainly be following up and sharing in our email to all of you who need to go any other tidbits that we may have overlooked or come out now. But I just wanted to mention that. I see that it's 1:02.
Yeah.
And I do know somebody asked about any more specific small steps. What are some examples of moving forward with small steps? I guess depending on your situation, if the small steps are, I'm feeling stuck in the job search, that's one thing. If the small steps are, I'm beating myself up about something I'm not doing well, that might mean addressing something very different. So I'm not sure exactly, but in terms of small steps along the lines of identification of superpowers, is that what you're asking? Or are you using our superpowers, I think is what you're actually wanting. Okay, small actions of using our superpowers. Well, I think here's one example. If you are particularly good at connecting people, you feel like connector is your superpower. And right now there's a huge need for that, right? So people are feeling disconnected, people are feeling isolated. So one rather large step you could take, but it could be in your mind a small step, is think about your neighborhood or think about a community that matters to you, a church group, whatever it may be. What is some way that you can bring communal time together? What is something you can do? I'm thinking of a block party. We have a neighbor who, that's her superpower. She runs the block party every year. And progressive dinner. Well, obviously we're not doing progressive dinners this year, but what she has done is continued through email. And every so often she'll send out a group email to the neighborhood. Hope everyone's doing well. If anybody needs groceries picked up, if anybody needs, any chores done, let me know, if, that type of thing. And then she has a list of youth for hire, and she'll send that out again and say, if anyone needs snow plowed, shoveled. We have a lot of strapping teenagers in the neighborhood. Here's their names and emails. Hope everyone's doing well. Let me know if you're not, that type of thing, right? So again, even in a pandemic, there are ways to connect if that's your superpower. If your superpower is, I don't know, writing, there are many opportunities for people to start a blog or just start sending out regular emails more often, or connect back with Wellesley colleagues, or whatever it may be. There's always some way, right? So I don't know if this is helpful to you or not to your question, but I'm trying to think of small steps to take.
Well, yes. And when we, I think it's easier to brainstorm about how to use your superpowers when we know which ones we're talking about. So that would be a great fun thing that we would love to help you with in an individual conversation, is to brainstorm with you. And also, I think along the lines of what Becky was saying, just thinking about a different realm to use your superpower. If you're very good at something that you do a lot in your family, maybe you could do some of that in your neighborhood, or maybe you do something at work a lot, but you realized you could have a side gig doing it or something like that. But it's a little easier to do that on an individual basis, and we'd love to help with that. Okay. All right, well, thank you all for joining and for all of the thank yous. We really appreciate your showing up. We appreciate your participation, your questions, your support for one another, your idea sharing.
Just to reiterate, because somebody just asked, how can you make an appointment? Do all of you, if not, handshake, actually, if I can.
It's joinhandshake.com.
Great.
I put it in there.
Super, thank you.
Is that right?
Compensating, yeah. One of us is writing, one of us is writing.
I also put our email addresses in there. So if you're confused on anything, don't hesitate to just shoot us a quick email. We'll be happy to.
I want to thank all of you who joined in on that, following up with comments. You're reminding me of, if you're the second choice and you still got the job, it's because you circled back and the first candidate didn't work out. So there you are. My mother often reminded me, oh, you can't give up. She said, I was not their first choice. But, for a teaching position years ago that she had wanted. But guess what? Then somebody else on the teaching staff announced that she was pregnant. And at that time, this was the 60s, you had to leave your job if you were pregnant. You couldn't be seen as a teacher showing. And so they reached back out and said, oh, actually, we do have a job and we'd love to hire you. This was a week before school started. So you never know. It's being in the right place at the right time and being persistent. So thank you all for chiming in on that. I think maybe we will sign off then.
Yes, that is the website.
Yes.
You got it.
Yeah.
All right, everyone.
If any of you ever, we'll be sending this recording out. You're all welcome to, I can't find Handshake. I can't figure it out. It's not working for me. Let us know through email. You'll have our emails as well. So, so we're here to help spring forward, embrace all good things. The sun will come out.
Thanks, everyone. It was a really fun conversation and we appreciate your input, and we look forward to having discussions with you in the future.